Okay, welcome back. I introduced the idea of how do we change, and I said pursuing Christ isn't just a part of change. It isn't another way to change. It isn't a supplement to the main reason of why we change. Pursuing Christ is how we change. And I've started to anchor that in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. So here is the point. Here is the refresher. In 2 Corinthians 3, we see that Paul says, when you behold the glory of the Lord, something happens. You are being transformed into the same image. I finished with Romans 8:29, which says Christians are actually destined to be conformed to the image of Christ. We are predestined. The Lord has chosen us to be like Jesus. What spurs that on here in 2 Corinthians 3:18? It is seeing the glory of the Lord. So a couple of more thoughts, and then I want to go back to Genesis chapter 1. We're being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. We understand that change is progressive, and when we talk about sanctification, there are three aspects. There is a present tense, there is a past sanctification, and then there is a future sanctification. Often when we're talking about a present sanctification, we mean a continuing or a progressive, you'll hear sanctification called. What do we mean by progressive? I don't mean it's modern, I don't mean it's hip, it's a progressive sanctification. I simply mean that it's little by little. It is progressing in that way. Well, why do we believe that? Because that's what the Scripture says. From one degree of glory to another. Let's say it another way. Conformity doesn't happen in a microwave, and 5 minutes later, I'm perfectly like Jesus. I love popcorn, honestly. I love watching movies. It's like when I smell popcorn, I have to watch a movie. I'm compelled. But yet that's not the way our sanctification works. I can't throw it in the microwave, push the button, and say, 2.5 minutes later, I am sanctified. Rather, you're transformed in a progressive way, from one degree of glory to another. Who is doing that work in you? Well, this is the nature of sanctification, that God calls you to obey, but He actually gives you the energy and the resources to obey. Without God giving you the grace and the mercy and the Spirit and the church and the Bible to be able to change, you wouldn't be able to change. So who's doing that work ultimately? It is the Lord who is the Spirit. God's Spirit indwells Christians, 1 Corinthians 6, and empowers them to live lives of holiness. So we are being transformed little by little by little through the work of the Spirit in our life. So how does change practically take place? I need to see the glory of God, and when I see the glory of God, I respond by incrementally growing to be more like Jesus. Now I asked you to go back to Genesis. I would like you to go to Genesis chapter 1. Maybe you've considered this, or maybe you've never considered this. But beholding the glory of God affects you and it affects me because you and I are image bearers, meaning that we are created in the likeness of God, and that comes from passages like these. Look at verse 26. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. This is one of the first references in the Scripture that we see God making man in His image. The things that we know about it is verse 26, this Trinitarian reference to the Godhead, let us make man in our image. We see verse 27, that there is gender that corresponds to being in the image of God, that both genders represent the image of God, and there are only two genders according to the Scripture. And that the purpose then is that we would reflect God, or we would image Him. Theologians would say that man is like God and man represents God. That's what we mean by being an image bearer. Or another theologian said this is what distinguishes human beings from the rest of God's creatures. We are created in God's image. Generally speaking, what do we mean by being an image bearer? It's that we are like God and we represent Him. We are image bearers. And this is going to be an integral part of understanding how we change. So let's walk through what it means to be an image bearer. Well, as I've just said, in chapter 1, you have gender that corresponds to that. We know that we're created that corresponds to it. We are created like God. We represent God. And generally speaking, that's what the scripture says. If you want to turn the page just a couple of pages, go over to Genesis chapter 5. We see this said again in Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his own image, and he named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Here's a couple of things that talk about being an image bearer. Verse 1, God created man and he made him in his likeness. There it is. We have that emphasis again. We had that in Genesis 1. We have that in Genesis 5. Second, male and female. Again, it corresponds to gender. Being in the image of God corresponds to the gender he has made us. That is verse 2. Then, verse 3, you'll see this. Adam had lived 130 years, and he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his own image. The way that we understand similarities between children and their parents is a helpful way to conceptualize us as image bearers for God, who is spirit. Now, when I see a newborn baby, I'm the worst at understanding the features of this baby with their parent. I don't know, I can't get it. It's like, oh, look at their ears. They look like mom's ears. And I'm like, oh, I don't see it. Or, oh, look at those little fingers. There's mom's fingers. And I'm like, I don't see it. I have 3 sons. All of them looked the same to me coming out of the womb. They look like babies to me. And yet, as they grow, what you'll see is that there are features that start to take place with our children. So when you see a child start to look a certain way, they have similar hair color, similar skin tone to you as parent, that idea is that your child or the child of that individual is in the likeness of their parent. This is what the scripture is saying. There's a similarity. So man is in the likeness of God. Adam has a son, and he is in his own likeness. Verse 3. Thus all the days, verse 4. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So how do we understand this? Big picture, we recognize that we represent God and we are like him, and there are going to be different categories for putting this into place. So go over to Genesis chapter 9. The first category is that we know we were created in the perfect likeness of God. But in Genesis 3, when the fall took place, we are no longer perfect image bearers, but that image of God in us has now been marred and distorted. And we choose the words marred and distorted carefully because we don't want to imply that mankind is no longer in the image of God. Genesis chapter 9 is taking place post-Genesis 3, post-worldwide cataclysmic flood, and you're going to see that in Genesis 9, verse 6, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. We are image bearers, and one of the reasons why capital punishment is legitimate is because when a person takes the life of another individual, they are now hurting the image of God that is in that person. Consider the implications just for a moment. Any person is in the image of God. All people are in the image of God. One of the reasons we hold to the dignity of all human life is not based on the functional contribution of that life to a society. We hold to the dignity of all human life because the image of God in people. This is why we protect the unborn. This is why we protect the elderly. The unborn are not bringing an immediate contribution to society. There are resources and nurturing that it takes for the unborn to make it to a level of independence and be a contributor to society. It's not about your functional value. It's about your ontological value. You have an ontological value by being in the very image of God. So Genesis 9:6 is reminding that even after the fall, we are all created in God's very image, and to hurt that image in another person warrants punishment. We're going to stop here. When I pick up next, we'll look at the New Testament and the way the New Testament speaks to being an image bearer.